From 8 p.m., American Public Media.
First Coast Financial and WJCT presents Surviving Retirement Election Edition. How the election may impact markets, tax rates, and your retirement plan. A free lunch and learn on September 18th at WJCT Studios. Registration required at WJCT.org. Quilt Fest Jacksonville, themed Sew Your Heart Out in its 37th year, showcases 400 quilts artfully sewn to be visually stunning and beyond tradition. September 19th through 21st at the Prime Osborne Center. Tickets at quiltfestjacks.com. Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjacks.com.
This is WJCT News 89.9. Up next, live headlines from NPR News and the WJCT News team.
Good morning, I'm Ann Schindler, and this is First Coast Connect. Today, a legendary Jacksonville baseball manager who survived one of the deadliest accidents in sports history is the subject of a new book. We talk to its author about the season of shattered dreams. Then, from Norah Jones to the Breeders, the Live Wildly showcase connects music fans to local conservation efforts. And NFL football and women's rugby, we look at how the First Coast fares as seasons for both kick off in earnest. Join the conversation. You can reach us on air at 904-549-2937. You can also email questions or comments to firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. You can also reach out on social media. It's all ahead this hour after the day's news.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Corva Coleman. There are new details about last week's school shooting in Winder, Georgia. The mother of the teenager accused of killing 4 people telephoned his school the morning of the attack. From Georgia Public Broadcasting, Chase McGee has more.
Marcy Gray is the mother of the alleged 14-year-old gunman, Colt. She was worried about her son. She'd apparently received some alarming messages from him that morning. So she called a school counselor and spoke to that person for 10 minutes, about 30 minutes before the shooting started. And administrators seemed to take that call seriously. We know someone went to go to a classroom where he was supposed to be, but he wasn't there. So then the school administrator leaves. And it's not much later that the alleged gunman tried to enter that classroom, but was prevented because there was a locked door in between him and the class.
Chase McGee reporting. The suspect is being charged as an adult. His father, Colin Gray, is charged with second-degree murder and with allowing his son access to the weapon. There have been many vigils in Winder and nearby communities to commemorate the victims. The Biden administration wants to improve access to care for mental health and substance use issues. NPR's Ritu Chatterjee reports a new rule will require health insurance plans to be more accountable for this coverage.
The 2008 Mental Health Parity and Addiction Equity Act requires most health plans to provide equitable coverage for mental health and substance use, and yet insurers aren't complying with the law, forcing consumers to seek out-of-network care, said White House Domestic Policy Advisor Neera Tanden.
Privately insured people with a mental health condition spend over $1,500 in out-of-pocket costs per year to treat their condition, twice as much compared to those without a mental health diagnosis.
The new rule will require insurers to evaluate their mental health coverage, including their provider networks and how often they require and deny prior authorizations. Most provisions in the new rule will apply starting January 2025. Ritu Chatterjee, NPR News.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken flies to Britain today. He's expected to talk about the wars in Ukraine and the Middle East with British leaders. NPR's Lauren Frayer has more from London.
Blinken's visit comes a week after the UK suspended some shipments of explosives and weapons it normally sends to Israel, after legal guidance showed they could be used by Israel to commit serious violations of international humanitarian law in Gaza. It's an example of how UK foreign policy, at least on Israel, may now be diverging from that of the Biden administration. The State Department says Blinken's 2-day visit here will focus on US-UK strategic dialogue, and that he'll meet with British officials to discuss the Middle East, the Indo-Pacific, and efforts to support Ukraine's defense against Russia. Lauren Frayer, NPR News, London.
You're listening to NPR News from Washington.
And this is WJCT News 89.9 in Jacksonville. Good morning. I'm Stephen Ponson. It's 9:04. St. Augustine is looking for input from members of the West City neighborhood for plans to fix up the area. West City is sandwiched between historic downtown and West St. Augustine, and it suffers from poor sidewalks, damaged houses, and stormwater issues, among other things. The city's Community Redevelopment Agency invites business owners, residents, and everyone else who's interested to attend a public meeting from 5 to 7 tomorrow night at Shiloh Baptist Church on West King Street. Topics for discussion include plans to preserve the neighborhood's culture and history, as well as improve pedestrian connectivity and other infrastructure. A 39-year-old contractor from Hilliard's been arrested for alleged construction fraud. Michael Chad Reed, who owns the Reed Group Elite Homes, faces a dozen counts of organized fraud, misapplication of construction funds, and grand theft. According to the charges, Reed had contracts with several customers to build homes in Nassau County between 2021 and 2023. Those contracts demanded a 15% deposit prior to construction beginning and promised the projects would be done within a year. But after the victims paid their deposits, construction on their homes was left unfinished or never begun. We're going to have highs in the low to mid 80s this afternoon in Jacksonville, and rain is in the forecast because of that stalled front that we've been dealing with for about a week or so. Heavy rain is possible at times this afternoon. There's the chance for rain into the evening and overnight.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include American Jewish World Service, supporting human rights advocates worldwide in the fight for democracy, equity, and justice for all people. Learn more at ajws.org.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided in part by Baptist Health.
Good morning. I'm Ann Schindler, and this is First Coast Connect. Today, 79 years ago, a fiery bus crash killed most of the members of the Spokane Indians traveling baseball team. One of the few survivors went on to become a legend in Jacksonville sports history. We talked to the author of a new book about the tragedy and its impact. Later in the program, how the Live Wildly Music Showcase is benefiting conservation on the First Coast. But first, Hank Aaron called him the greatest manager I ever played for. The former Jacksonville Braves manager, Ben Garrity, is just one character in a new book by Eric Vickery, who joins me now by video. Good morning, Eric.
Good morning, Ann. Great to be here.
Great to have you, and thank you so much for joining us from Pacific time, which I'm sure is an eon away, but thank you for getting up early to do this. So, Eric, you were a sports writer, a baseball writer, in fact, when you learned what happened to the Spokane Indians in 1946. How did you first learn about this?
Yeah, I was actually researching a totally unrelated topic. From 1946, there was a player named John Leovich who played for the Bremerton Blue Jackets, a team near Seattle, and I was researching his career for an article I was writing, and I came across a newspaper headline that described this horrific bus crash involving the Spokane Indians in the Cascade Mountains. And the details of the accident really struck me, and being a lifelong baseball fan, I was surprised that I had never heard of this accident. So I set out to kind of learn as much as I could and realized there was a lot more to the story, so that's how I ended up writing the book.
And so you started digging into this story, and as you say, it was a horrific accident. I believe it's still categorized as the worst in U.S. sports history. So tell us the details of what happened in that accident.
Yeah, so on June 24th, 1946, the team was traveling west across Washington State for the team's next series in Bremerton. And about halfway to Seattle, where they would then cross a ferry to Bremerton, the team bus, which was carrying 15 players, as well as the bus driver, met an oncoming vehicle near Snoqualmie Pass at an elevation of about 3,000 feet. That forced the bus to the side of the road. The bus driver lost control of the bus, and it ultimately broke through a cable guard wire and tumbled down this steep ravine about 300 feet. The bus caught fire as it rolled and then came to rest about 300 feet below the road. And of the 15 players on board, 9 died as a result of the accident. 6 players survived, as well as the bus driver.
And so 9 men died. 6 of them died instantly. Many others were injured with terrible burns. But Ben Garrity was one of the survivors. Tell us a little bit about how he managed to survive that accident and what he did immediately after to sort of help the other players that were in such a dire circumstance.
Yeah, so Ben was one of several players who was thrown from the bus when the accident occurred. And he actually was knocked unconscious, kind of sort of came to and saw the bus down below burning and kind of gathered his wits and climbed back up to the highway and flagged down some passersby to ask for help. Ben had a broken kneecap and as well as a pretty severe head injury as a result of the accident. So he was hospitalized for a few days and then was released and tried to actually come back and manage the team that year, but because of his injuries was unable to do that for the rest of the season.
So he was 33 at the time of this accident. He told the Associated Press the day after the crash, as you note in your book, "I guess I'm pretty lucky. I was thrown right out a window and I took the window frame right with me." But he was knocked out, so he didn't remember kind of how that happened, but he woke up, I guess, in the window of this bus that had ripped out during the crash.
That's right, yeah. Ben did remember describing seeing the headlights of an oncoming vehicle sort of forcing the bus to the side of the road, and then he remembered going off the edge, and then next thing he knew, he kind of woke up having been thrown from the bus.
So
quite remarkable.
Yeah, this incident inspired a novel in 2006 called Until the End of the Ninth, which was partly inspired by that tragedy and sort of tracks it. But this is the first time this has been recounted in a nonfiction piece like this. Your book, The Season of Shattered Dreams, it looks at a whole period of baseball in a very interesting lens. I mean, this terrible accident is a animating moment, to kind of get us into the story. But you look at the whole environment of post-World War II America, the challenges that a lot of these ball players were facing as they returned from war. And you focus on 3 individuals in particular. Ben Garrity is a local known name here to some, but tell us a little bit about him for people in this area who may not know who he is.
Sure. Ben was born in Brooklyn, New York, and grew up a big athlete, played basketball. That was actually his best sport, was basketball and baseball, and then attended Villanova University, actually studied journalism there, and was a highly successful baseball player there. And that attracted the attention of the Brooklyn Dodgers, who signed him as a college senior. And so Ben went straight from college to the major leagues, which is quite unusual. He sort of skipped the minor leagues his first year and played under Casey Stengel with the Brooklyn Dodgers in 1936. So that was his first taste of the major leagues. And Ben sort of quickly realized that he didn't have what it took to stick in the major leagues as a player. He did pretty well his first couple weeks, but then his batting average dipped to below 200. And so ultimately he realized that his future in the game was going to be as a coach or manager. And so playing for Casey Stengel, one of the all-time great managers in the game, he sort of set out to learn as much as he could about Stengel, would stay up late at night just talking baseball with him. Ben, after that first season, sort of bounced around the minor leagues for a few years and was actually working at a airplane factory in California during the war when Casey Stengel recruited him back to the Boston Braves for a couple more seasons in the major leagues during the war. And he was sort of just hanging on to the last of his playing career in 1946 with the Spokane Indians when this accident occurred.
If you're just joining us, we are talking about a new book about the tragic bus crash that decimated the Spokane Indians baseball team, a story with a Jacksonville connection. You can join our conversation on air by calling 904-549-2937, or you can email comments or questions to firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. So I mentioned, Eric, you tell this story largely through 3 of the teammates, 2 of whom survived this crash and 1 who didn't. One of the other survivors, his name is Jack Lorkey, and he really had a remarkable life story even before surviving this accident. Tell us about him and just kind of his almost cinematic life story.
Yeah, Jack's story really is almost made for Hollywood. He grew up in Los Angeles and signed with San Diego Padres of the Pacific Coast League out of high school, but then was sent to fight overseas during the war and actually fought in the Battle of the Bulge. Survived that, survived the war, and then actually returned home, sailed back to New York, and then was about to take the first flight of his life back home to California when he was bumped off the airplane by a higher-ranking officer. And then the plane later stopped to refuel in Kansas City and crashed. So Jack had already survived the war and survived this near plane crash in 1946 when he joined the Spokane Indians. And he was actually pulled off the bus about an hour before it crashed when he got a message, actually it was relayed from the State Patrol, that the San Diego Padres were calling him back up to the Pacific Coast League. So Jack said goodbye to his teammates and hitchhiked back to Spokane, and it was just an hour later that this crash occurred. And then he earned the earned nickname Lucky Lorky after the accident.
And that was a nickname that he had some trouble accepting, right? I mean, he had survived, as you say, landed in Normandy, survived the Battle of the Bulge, survived a plane, avoiding a plane crash and then avoiding this terrible bus crash.
Yeah, definitely a well-earned nickname, but one he was never comfortable with. But it sort of rolled off the tongue and stuck. Even in the baseball encyclopedia, when it was first printed in the 1960s, he's not listed as Jack Lorky, he's listed as Lucky Lorky. So it was the name that just sort of stuck with him. But you can imagine why he was uncomfortable with it, because it was a constant reminder of his friends who didn't make it.
Sure. So Ben moved on eventually to have a really strong Jacksonville connection. Ben Garrity, if people have been to the baseball stadium here in Jacksonville, they've probably seen his plaque that's dedicated to him. But catch us up on what Ben Garrity meant when he was in Jacksonville and his connection to Hank Aaron.
Sure. So Ben was hired by the Milwaukee Braves to manage in their minor league system. And in 1951 was promoted up to Jacksonville, who were then a affiliate of the Giants for the first couple of years, but then they sort of switched affiliations to the Braves. So in 1953, Ben was managing the Jacksonville Braves. And on that team was Hank Aaron, as well as Horace Garner and Felix Mantilla. And those were the first black players to play in the South Atlantic League. So they integrated the league that year with Ben Garrity as their manager. And Ben, in his 6 seasons in Jacksonville between 51 and 57, the team finished in first or second place 5 out of those 6 seasons. So very successful run. And by all accounts, as you mentioned, Hank Aaron called him the greatest manager he ever played for, and perhaps the greatest manager who ever lived. So very high praise for Ben.
And Hank Aaron was just 19 when he was playing under Ben Garrity. He said in one quote, he chewed me out when I needed it, but he taught me how good I could be. And most important, he taught me how to study the game and never make the same mistake twice. So as you say, that South Atlantic League was where this minor league color barrier was broken, sometimes called the Sally League. It was a tough league to play in for Hank Aaron and for the other teammates of color.
It was. That was at a period in time where the black players were unable to eat at the same restaurants as their teammates. They were not able to stay at the same hotels. So Ben would often visit those players at the hotel or eat with them in the bus because they were not able to go inside the restaurant. So it was a difficult time for those players. They endured a lot of racist taunts and things from fans as well as opposing teams, but they had full support from their manager, and Hank Aaron actually ended up being the MVP of the league that year. Had a very successful season. Of course, that propelled him on his way to a Hall of Fame major league career.
And Hank Aaron, I believe, really credited Ben Garrity with sticking up for the team when they were being discriminated against, would challenge restaurant owners or accompany them to a different restaurant so as not to kind of facilitate or participate in that racist attitude.
Absolutely, yeah. Ben had full support of his players, and Hank Aaron actually wrote about that in his autobiography about Aaron that year. So yeah, it was an important time in our country's history as things were changing, and people like Hank Aaron certainly needed a man like Ben Garrity to help him navigate those difficult circumstances.
So Ben Garrity's grandnephew actually wrote a long essay about Ben Garrity for the Jackson, which is a local publication here. And I reached out to him and his father. They weren't able to join us today, but they said that, those memories were really powerful for the family, that they regarded Ben Garrity very much as a hero. And there is, in fact, as I said, a plaque at the 121 Financial Ballpark here in Jacksonville that honors Ben Garrity as one of the legends of Jacksonville baseball. He won 4 pennants, I guess, or won pennants over 4 years. Is that right? And was then the minor league manager of the year twice.
That's right, yeah. And then ultimately was promoted up to AAA. And so got very close to managing the major leagues. That was ultimately his goal, but never reached that goal. And part of that was because the Braves, he was so good at sort of teaching players in the minor leagues and fostering them along in their careers that they wanted him to stay in the minors and continue in that role. And Ben actually came back to Jacksonville in the early 60s when the team was an affiliate of the Cleveland Indians, and then managed for a couple more seasons in Jacksonville at that time before his death.
So this accident that kind of begins this book also in many ways shapes the life of the men who survived the accident and really had an impact on them. Talk a little bit about how Ben Garrity was affected throughout his life by the trauma of that accident.
Yeah, so Ben's goal, as I mentioned, was to manage in the major leagues, and in order to do that, he had to get experience in the minor leagues, and that meant more bus travel. So he traveled in buses throughout his minor league managerial career. This is before most teams traveled by airplane. So he coped with that in part with alcohol, and he would sit right behind the bus driver. And in Pat Jordan's book, A False Spring, he described Ben as being just sort of hyper aware and sitting right behind the bus driver, sort of anxiously making sure they got to their destination. So in some ways it was probably what we call today post-traumatic stress disorder. So Ben lived with that throughout his life, and coped with using alcohol, which probably had some detrimental effects on his health. So the crash no doubt affected the rest of his baseball career as well as his life in general.
And his alcohol problem was really widely known. I mean, it was something that affected him and his family and his players, that it was not something that was, a hidden problem that he had.
That's right. Yeah, I was able to interview 6 players who played for Ben during their careers in the 50s and early 60s, and they all alluded to Ben certainly liking his beer and drinking, in the clubhouse after games, which was very commonplace at that time. But certainly Ben, probably drank more than most, and that certainly had some negative impacts on his health. He missed actually a season because of stomach ulcers in the late 50s, and then had some more health complications in her first year back in Jacksonville in 61.
So I want to show a picture of the book, Season of Shattered Dreams. As I mentioned, you focus largely on 3 people related to that accident. And one of them was Vic Passetti, who was on the bus, and he didn't survive. Why did you choose him as someone you wanted to focus on as well?
Yeah, so Vic Passetti was an 18-year-old out of San Francisco, and by all accounts, he was the best prospect on the team. He was also the youngest player on the team. And I was able to track down descendants of Vic, his nieces, who have a wealth of information in scrapbooks, letters, photographs, newspaper documents, all of this sort of documenting Vic's early life growing up in San Francisco. He was a highly successful high school athlete, was chosen to participate in this All-American game at the Polo Grounds in New York, where he played for Mel Ott and against Connie Mack, and among his teammates was Richie Ashburn. So even at age 16, he had already achieved quite a bit, and then was recruited by all major league teams, and ultimately decided to sign with the Oakland Oaks under Casey Stengel. Casey Stengel actually sent Vic to Spokane in 1946 to gain more experience. That's how he ended up with the Spokane Indians in '46. So Vic, even though he was the youngest player on the team, had already accomplished a lot in his baseball career and probably had the highest ceiling in terms of future as a major league prospect. So I thought his story was very interesting, and certainly that's why I chose to focus on that in the book.
Yeah, and he was just 18 at the time. Did you find that the families were gratified to have you digging into this story that, as you say, like even as a baseball writer, was something that you had not known about and really was sort of largely forgotten?
Absolutely, yeah. I found that many of the family members I contacted were very happy that their relative stories were coming to light. Players like Vic Pichetti and Bob Patterson, another player who was killed, a great prospect. These were players who were on their way up, and they sort of just disappeared from the baseball landscape. The accident was reported in newspapers across the country immediately afterwards, and then occasionally on anniversaries, like 10 years after, 20 years after, there'd be an article in the papers. But now, close to 80 years later, these stories had all pretty much faded from our collective consciousness. So the families were very happy that these stories are kind of finally coming to light and that their family members would be remembered in this way.
It's not just Lucky Lorkey that had a very cinematic life. This book really is seems like it's got cinematic potential. Is there any interest that you've heard from anybody in terms of turning this story into a film?
Well, I've heard that a lot from people who read the book, and even sort of writing in and seeing all the interesting facets of the story, and of course the time period, being after World War II. It's a fascinating time in our country's history. As we talked about, Jack Lorkey's crazy life story is truly fascinating. I haven't been approached by anyone, but I certainly think it could make a great film, and maybe that'll happen someday.
And people can get this book. Is it available just on Amazon, Eric, or do you know if it's available locally here in Jacksonville?
Yeah, it's not widely available in bookstores. It's I think most people will find it online, Amazon, or through my publisher, Roman in Littlefield, which is ROWMAN, Roman.com.
All right. Well, Eric Vickery, it's a pleasure to talk to you. Thanks so much for writing the book. Thanks so much for coming on to talk about it.
Thank you very much for having me. Appreciate it.
Up next, living country superstar Eric Church to singer-songwriter Ryan Bingham. Some big names and broad musical styles are coming to St. Augustine. But behind the scenes, the Live Wildly Showcase aims to connect music fans to local conservation efforts. To tell us about it, I'm joined now by Meredith Budd. She's Director of Strategic Initiatives with the Live Wildly Foundation. Hey, Meredith.
Hi there. Good morning.
Good morning. Also joined by Dianya Markovits, Director of Public Relations for SJC Cultural Events and all-around cultural guru in St. Johns County. Nice to have you.
Very kind. Thank you. Good morning.
So we're going to get to the 13 headliners and festival details in a bit. But Meredith, tell us, if you will, what is the connection between live music and the goals of the Live Wildly Foundation?
Yeah, so Live Wildly Foundation is all about connecting people to nature and instilling value for wild Florida in people. And so when you are looking at a music festival that's outside in an area in a county that has such beautiful places that you can go out and recreate in, it's a really, really synergistic partnership to be able to promote the live music, the opportunities to be outdoors, not only at the festival, but in the surrounding areas that we have right here in St. Johns County.
And so what is Live Wildly and what does it do?
We are a 501c3 nonprofit family foundation, and we are dedicated to protecting wild Florida with the concept of balance. How do we balance economic development with the protection needs for wild Florida, natural resources, wildlife needs? We have 1,000 people moving to the state every single day, and that's okay. We need to find balance. We have to accommodate the growth, but make sure that we're protecting what makes Florida so special at the same time.
And so the group kind of operates under the philosophy that that's possible, right? That it's possible to balance a lot of growth with preserving the natural environment. And yet it seems like so often those things are in conflict.
Yeah, it definitely is possible. It takes a lot of forward thinking. It takes a lot of planning, and it takes a lot of initiative, not only from our elected officials, but from the people that live in the communities that we call home here in Florida. And so it is certainly possible there are ways to build in a way that is compatible with our wild places, our natural resources, our water, our wildlife. We need to pick the places that are of lesser environmental value to place development, and we need to pick the places that are of greater environmental value to protect and set aside for conservation and for protection.
If you're just joining us, we are talking about the Live Wildly Foundation and the festival that is going to accompany it in just a couple weeks. I'm joined by Meredith Budd, Dianya Markovits, and you're welcome to join our conversation. You can call us at 904-549-2937, or you can email firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. So, Dianya, this is a music festival, but it has traditionally had this partnership. So explain a little bit about the festival, its origins, and this is the Sing Out Loud Festival, I should say, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. It was introduced in 2016, so it's been around for almost 10 years. This is our 8th year. Do some quick math. That's 8. 8
Good job.
years.
Not bad for a Monday morning, Diana. Nice.
8 years, and it's always been in September, and there's a very specific reason for that. St. Johns County's economy is based on tourism. September is one of the worst times of year for visitation, is the lowest time of the year for visitation. So we launched this in 2016 for every September. It's throughout the month of September, and it's really to highlight, started off as a way to highlight our local and regional artists. And it's just grown to this massive marquee event over the weekend of September 21 and 22. But one of the core values has always been philanthropy, is a big part, in addition to supporting our local economy and our local artists. Every year we partner with a philanthropy to give back through ticket sales. We've given over $400,000 since the start of this festival. We're incredibly proud, especially it's just such an apropos time to focus on land conservation here in Florida and especially in St. Johns County. So we're incredibly proud to have partnered with Live Wildly Foundation this year.
Yeah. And so how do you select your nonprofit that you're going to benefit?
For sure. That's a great question. Last year, for example, we partnered with the First Responders Project, which helped to offset PTSD for first responders through training and retreats, as well as we put music instruments into all 47 public schools in St. Johns County. So it really does speak to each year's, the need for each year. And we believe that with the current state of land conservation in Florida and the rate of development, this year, it really makes a lot of sense to have conservation at the forefront of it. I suspect that this is going to be a long-term partnership because of, you're racing against the rate of development and how to balance those two, as Meredith had mentioned. How do you balance the rate of growth with land conservation? And that's so many reasons why people come to Florida is to come visit our beautiful landscapes. So to pair that with a large music festival where you've got tens of thousands of people's eyes and ears, that's a great way to share that message.
So I probably need to ask you, I mean, at this time, you made this decision to partner with Live Wildly a long time ago, I'm guessing. But recently, the issue of, how we conserve our natural spaces, whether we maintain a commitment to keep things like our state parks, wild or wilder than they might become. Has that kind of focused this partnership a little bit in your mind or in the mind of the organizers in terms of messaging, particularly to people in St. Johns County that were so vocally opposed to that idea?
Absolutely. I mean, it really was a rallying cry from all parts of Florida, especially, Anastasia State Park is just such a treasure, as all of our state parks are. I mean, they're gold award-winning state parks for the entire United States. So yes, it is it is a time for loud voices and lots of attention on land conservation in St. Johns County. It is the fastest growing county in Florida as well. And I think that there's a big push to hopefully connect what Live Wildly has worked so hard on is the Florida Wildlife Corridor and trying to figure out a way for protecting of lands and landscapes for animals to migrate. So this is a phenomenal time to really bring the very large, like I said, thousands of eyes and ears on this project.
Yeah. And Meredith, you operate outside of St. Johns County, though, right? You have a larger footprint. So where are your works mostly focused?
So Live Wildly Foundation is statewide. We focus on critical areas that we are able to connect in, especially here in St. Johns County. This year, we were very fortunate to be connected with the Sing Out Loud Festival. And so a lot of our effort has this year been focused here in Northeast Florida. But as Diana Diana had mentioned, we have been really strongly focused on the Florida Wildlife Corridor, which is an 18 million acre landscape across the entire state. That was dedicated or put into law, I should say, in 2021. It is in Florida statute, that 18 million acre landscape. Not all of it's protected. So of the 18 million acres, you have 10 million acres that are in conservation or in protection of some form, but the remaining 8 million acres are what are known as opportunity areas, meaning those areas are still under private ownership. Some of that's going to get converted to development, but we need to do our best in order to maintain connectivity. So that's where Live Wildly's focus has primarily been, in looking at how do we make sure that the Florida Wildlife Corridor remains an intact natural landscape across the state of Florida.
And describe for us where that corridor runs.
It runs all the way from the Panhandle down to the Florida Keys. It is fully connected at this point in time, so there is a way for wildlife to move quite literally from the most southern tip of Florida all the way up to the Panhandle currently. But that's including the 8 million acres that are not in protection. So in order to make sure we have connectivity maintained in perpetuity, we need to be collectively, we being everyone that's passionate about land conservation in Florida, be focused on how we maintain those 8 million acres, or a large portion of those 8 million acres, in some form of protection.
So how did you come to conservation yourself? I mean, what makes you passionate about Florida landscapes, and what's your background?
So I have been in the conservation space my entire career. I, back in high school, was committed to wildlife and animals, and so my undergraduate and graduate work is in the sciences and in policy, environmental policy. And so it was very synergistic fit when the opportunity at Live Wildly came about. I've been working in environmental policy again for the most of my career, and I've been with Live Wildly for almost 2 years now.
And the challenge, as you say, in Florida is somewhat different than other places, mostly because of the growth, that enormous amount of people moving in every day. So are there areas that you think exemplify what Live Wildly believes can happen in terms of adjacency, wildlife, and people living in a way that works?
Well, I think that generally I'll just note that there has been a lot of support in our state for land conservation over the last years, especially since the dedication of the Florida Wildlife Corridor. There has been bipartisan support for land conservation. The corridor designation was unanimously supported at our state level, which is a pretty rare event.
Right.
And so it's been kind of exciting over the last few years being in the land conservation space to see both sides of the aisle come together on what makes our state so special. I think there are communities out there that are doing a really great job of balancing the development needs with the needs for natural resources. One in particular is Babcock Ranch down in the southwest part of the state. We saw how well they weathered storms. It was reported upon pretty widely.
People may not know, but the story of Babcock. But tell us a little bit about that community, because it really is unusual.
Yeah, Babcock Ranch is a very sustainable, is a good way that I would describe it. It's a sustainable based community. It integrated solar. It was one of the first communities to really integrate solar into the way that it's been developed and built out. The way that it's been set aside, or whether the land that was set aside in order to develop Babcock was significant. A large portion of land was dedicated to conservation in the approval process for Babcock Ranch. And so it's been a really good example and a good model for how we can find that balance.
It also has these able to withstand, Category 5 hurricane buildings, right? It's
yes.
sustainable.
And in the most recent events, the hurricane events that we saw really hit Southwest Florida really hard, Babcock weathered the storms very, very well.
All right, so let's talk music a little bit, Diana. This festival, it's a 2-day festival. It's at Francis Field, which is right downtown St. Augustine. Who's coming? Who are the headliners, and who are you most excited about?
Definitely. 13 headliners. It's quite packed over 2 days, 21 and 20, September 21 and 22. The headliners are Eric Church, country music superstar Eric Church on that Saturday. And then Sunday is Noah Khan and Norah Jones. I would say that those two are they're just the heavyweights there. But for me personally, Kevin Morby, hands down. I've followed his career. He's been playing for a very, very long time. But yeah, so for me, Kevin Morby, but you've got 13 to choose from, plus all the local acts that are playing leading up to this big weekend festival as well. I think we just counted 130 local and regional acts. And those are all free performances. And then again, leading up to that marquee event on the 21st and 22nd in downtown St. Augustine.
Yeah, and so that main event is downtown, but all of these other venues around the city are being utilized by these local bands, often other bands that are. So, how many venues are you using?
We have about 12 venues around St. Augustine. So we always used to call it trick or treating for live music. So you can literally get on your bike or just walk around and go to various venues and see a bunch of live music, a diversity of live music. And that's all for free. And it's really this beautiful lead up to this massive, 2-day event at Francis Field that, again, has all been focused on conservation this year.
Yeah. So if people are interested in attending either the free events around town or the big 2-day festival, how do they get tickets? Are tickets still available?
Tickets are still available. They have been going quite fast. The Noah Khan is one of the most, he's a festival favorite. So those have been going really, really fast. But you can go to singoutloudfestival.com. That's singoutloudfestival.com and peruse the entire schedule, again, over 130 acts, and as well as getting those tickets to the Live Wildly Showcase on the 21st and 22nd.
You're going to have a busy couple weeks, I'm guessing?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And I know I'll always see you out there too.
Oh, yeah. I'm excited about it. I can't wait. Thank you so much, Meredith Budd, Dianya Markovits. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.
All right. Up next, how a local women's rugby team plans. Women's rugby gets underway in Jacksonville this month. But before that, the team is inviting the rugby curious to hit the pitch. To tell us about it, I'm joined by Stacey Nemeth, team coach and president. Hey, Stacey.
Hi, how are you?
And player Jennifer Ringel-Spa. Hey, Jennifer, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
So tell us, first of all, how, Jennifer, did you get involved with rugby in the first place?
Sure. So I started in college. There was a men's team who wanted to teach rugby to a group of women. And so they picked out actually sorority women. And I was involved in a sorority. And so we started and we really enjoyed the time. But we said, okay, touch rugby is fine. It's a touch. It's a different version. You just touch and then the ball ends. But we decided we wanted to do this for real. So we ended up starting a team that fall. And then when I moved to Jacksonville, I immediately reached out to the team here and said, hey, I'm here. Is there a team? I'd love to join.
I'm going to say that most people don't usually think of sorority girls as being the foundation of like a rugby team.
Yeah. It was definitely a different experience. And traveling to other teams, they were like, oh, you're the sorority rugby team, because everyone on the team was sorority women at that point.
So what was the appeal?
Just getting out on the field. It's unlike any game I've ever played. There's a big camaraderie. It is an individual sport, but in a team aspect. You are really fighting for each other on the team. You're protecting each other. So if someone gets tackled, you immediately have to get over them and protect them from the other team to try and get that ball. So that camaraderie aspect was the biggest draw for me.
Stacey, she describes it as kind of an individual sport with a team element. I mean, how does that work? And what is the individual component?
So every position on rugby, it requires a different type of skill, body type, or anything like that. So we say rugby is for everyone. We'll always find a position for you. So like our front rowers, they need to do a different kind of workout, a different kind of effort on the field versus the winger who runs really fast down the sideline and scores. So you have to really be strong individually, but you have to be able to work together and kind of keep those skills all together to kind of work together.
And how did you come to the sport?
So I played sports my whole life. Unfortunately, after high school, I didn't have a sport to play, and I was at college. I went to a local restaurant, and the president at the time looked at me wearing a soccer shirt and says, hey, you should keep coming, keep playing. Kept emailing me until I was like, you know what, I'm just going to go. I'm going to check it out. And then I was stuck ever since. So.
And you talk about not having an opportunity after school. There does seem to be this, a lot of women athletes lose the opportunity because there just isn't maybe at the semi-pro or pro level those same sports.
Yeah, and it really depends on the level you want. That's how I always made my friends. That's how I knew life basically. So it was like, how am I supposed to be a non-athlete as a college student? So having that and having a different variety of ages and people, I've learned so much. I found so many different friendships I never would have thought I did, but all within a sport aspect as well, which was really cool.
Jennifer, people have this idea about rugby, right? And it's one of those sports that occupies the space in everybody's head. as particularly rough, maybe even violent, certainly dangerous. Did all of those things, did you come to the sport with all of those same preconceptions?
I actually had no idea what rugby was, and which is kind of bad because I grew up in New England, which has a huge rugby community. But I didn't come with any of those like knowledge, but learning you do see it and it does look pretty violent sometimes on the field. However, we are very, very particular in the way that we tackle. We have very, very specific rules of the way you have to tackle someone. It's unlike football where, they can just shove someone or they can like grab them in a certain spot. You have to hit them at the sternum or below. And if you hit them any higher, you can actually get a penalty and an infraction on the field. So
I mean, getting hit in the sternum still doesn't sound like a ton of fun.
yeah,
right?
it's not that bad. You learn to fall too. We teach people how to fall when they're getting hit. So we do your knees, hips, shoulders. That's the way we teach people how to fall.
Uh-huh. So, I mean, I hear you say it's for everyone, but in some ways that really doesn't sound like for everyone, right?
Oh no, it's every position on the field. There's a certain body aspect that you need. So our props, I'm a prop, so typically we're the bigger people on the field. They're usually the more muscular. We have a very specific role. We have a thing called a scrum, which when a penalty happens, we have to essentially shove against each other. Typically you see that in some rugby highlights. Scrums are very popular. Versus a winger, they're usually the smaller and fast people. So literally any body type is accepted on the field.
So, Stacey, there have been some breakthroughs for rugby and women's rugby. The World Cup in New Zealand is going to break some engagement and viewership records. There's also a women's rugby team that took a medal in Paris for the first time ever in the Olympics. So that was kind of a high-profile showcase. More recently, one of the players sort of went viral for her participation in a Sports Illustrated shoot. So tell us a little bit about Alona Mar and kind of what she symbolizes for women's rugby.
She's just an amazing person and athlete. Like, I think TikTok really set her off. Her content made people who didn't know rugby kind of connect more and then ask more questions about rugby and just make them curious. We always had watch parties to watch them. We encouraged all of our friends and family and fans to watch. But that was an amazing game, and we were so excited. I think we were all freaking out in our little group chat when they did. We're so excited to see what she has next to do. I think because of her, we have almost 25 people signed up for our Try Rugby Day saying, hey, we saw it in the Olympics. This seems so cool. Like, I want to do this. How do I be involved?
So this Try Rugby Day is for anybody who wants to try it out.
Yes.
Come out Saturday, the 14th at 11 a.m. And who all are you telling to come?
Anyone and everyone who wants to, has been interested in the sport. We've been promoting it on our social media. We've had friends of friends say like, hey, I think you'd like this sport. We actually saw our website viewership go up by like 500% after the Alona Mar and everyone won the bronze medal. So that was huge. And we're really excited for new people to come out and try the sport. Any age, right now our age range in the club ranges from 20 to 42. We're averaging about 28, I think is the average age right now. But really anyone who's interested in the sport and wants to learn.
Well, Jennifer, Stacey, thanks so much for coming on. I hope you guys have a great season.
Thank you so much.
All right. Up next, lessons learned in Miami during the Jags' first regular season game.
Phoenix, Arizona just crossed 100 straight days of temperatures over 100 degrees.
In Arizona, if we have 2 weeks of extreme heat and let's say 400 people die, and we call the federal government and say, hey, we need some assistance here, the federal government say, no, that's not an emergency.
Extreme heat kills more people than hurricanes, floods, and tornadoes combined. So why isn't it considered an official disaster? That's on the next On Point.
Today at 11, here on WJCT News 89.9.
I'm Deepa Fernandez. Farmers in the Gulf South and across the country are evolving the ways they grow their crops through a climate justice approach. We head to one black-owned farm to hear what they're doing and how they hope to address historic issues of discrimination in their vital industry. Next time, here and now.
Today at 1 on WJCT News 89.9. Abortion is the top issue for voters this election, and for women under 45, it's the single most important. But the presidency isn't the only place abortion is appearing on the ballot. At least 11 states, including Arizona, Montana, and Florida, are voting directly on the issue. How abortion is shaping the election next time on 1A. Today, starting at 10 on WJCT News 89.9.
And we're back. It was an upsetting afternoon for Jaguars fans Sunday after a last-second field goal gave the Miami Dolphins the win. Here to break down what did and didn't work, we're joined by News4Jax sportscaster Alessandra Pombriand. Hi, Alessandra. Welcome back.
Yeah, thank you. I wish, we could be talking about a win after week one, but it's okay. The Jaguars, they lost 20-17 on that last-second field goal to the Dolphins. So they started the season 0-1, which is obviously not the way they wanted to start the season. But, Justin Barney, who's my boss, he wrote an article after the game, and he said it was a good start, forgettable finish. And I think everyone wants to forget what happened in that second half. But the Jaguars, they did lead 17-7 at halftime, so they had a 10-point lead. It was looking good for them until Travis Etienne fumbled in the end zone, which flipped the momentum in the third quarter. That started the Dolphins' rally because the very next play was a Tagovailoa touchdown pass to Tyreek Hill for 80 yards.
Really flip-flopped there.
Oh, absolutely. And I did say in my pregame that I thought the Dolphins were going to win. Sorry, Jaguars fans. I thought the Dolphins were going to win because of that explosive offense, and that's literally why they did win. So kudos to me, I guess.
Yeah, way to predict a loss. Thanks, Alessandra. Yeah, Doug Peterson actually called it a tale of two halves, and I think that they really were riding high. What happened to Travis? I mean, he got that ball kind of punched out, but was he playing fast and loose? Should he have been, or was it just, it could have been stripped from anybody?
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely that the defensive player that came in just like punched the ball out of his hands. He did what he needed to do. He did a very good job, and Travis Etienne just couldn't keep a hold of it. It's unfortunate that happened. That's a little uncharacteristic for Travis Etienne. He's a veteran. He's a really good running back. But I will say Tank Bigsby had a really good day. I don't want to say backup because they both shared the field quite a bit. But that definitely was the difference. You could see the momentum completely shift after. Now, a lot of the players, they don't believe in momentum shifts when we asked some of them. But, I mean, you could obviously see it that the Dolphins took over right after that. They had the confidence after that. And they went out and won. And there was a lot of time still left on the clock for Trevor Lawrence to get something going. And then, of course, that is not what happened.
I thought it was cute. Jacksonville today did the math on Trevor Lawrence because this is his fourth year as the starting quarterback. He's passed for over 11,000 yards in his 50 games, and they did the math on that. They found that it was roughly the distance from one Jaguars habitat to another, from Everbank Stadium to the Jacksonville Zoo.
Oh, that's adorable.
Yeah, I thought that was cute. So, but he said afterwards, we just kind of gave it away.
Yeah.
And I think that was probably your takeaway too.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like last season, we're always talking about how the defense did what they needed to do to win the game, and the offense just was not able to actually win the game. Like, that was the issue that we had last season. That's the issue that we had in week one. So it's a little, it's kind of frustrating when you're talking about the same issues that they had from 2023 and you're hyping up this team that they're going to be so good, and then they weren't able to actually, when the moment was there that you needed to come and put a touchdown drive together, they weren't able to do that. I will say that Brian Thomas Jr., I think he had a really good day. First career touchdown for him, so that's really awesome for the rookie first-round draft pick.
Yeah.
I talked about Tank Bigsby. He led all rushers with 12 carries for 73 yards. That's pretty good for him. He kind of not a great season for his rookie season last year, so that was a really good performance for his first game. But then, when you're looking at the defense, I think Ryan Nielsen's defense looks great. They rotate very liberally, obviously man heavy. All positions were subbing in players in and out. You saw that, especially with the linebackers. And especially Dianya Jones, I think was the third play, was defending, was it Tyreek Hill or one of the Dolphins receivers? And I think it was an incompletion. So I think yes, the defense looked good. I think people should be excited about Ryan Nielsen's defense. The offense, of course, is just a little not at the same step, I guess, as the defense. But
I got to ask you for something that happened off the field,
Yes.
but certainly kind of stole the headlines.
Yeah.
Wide receiver Tyreek Hill being pulled over, detained, handcuffed on the ground, and then one of his former teammates.
Yeah, that's right. So Tyreek Hill, he was detained by police and put in handcuffs outside of the stadium, literally right at the entrance of the stadium during a traffic stop. He was stopped for speeding and reckless driving. And then a former Jaguar, Calais Campbell, that we all know well, said post-game that he was also detained and put in handcuffs.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So he's a current Miami Dolphins player. So is Tyreek. So he tried to stop to try to de-escalate the situation. Then he was put in handcuffs as well. The police officer that was one of the police officers that that detained Tyreek Hill, put him in handcuffs, was placed on administrative leave. Right. Actually, I think it was in the middle of the game, to be honest, when that happened, and the news came out right after the game.
Possibly embarrassing for Miami police. And then Tyreek kind of did like a little motion during the game, didn't he?
He did.
What happened there?
So after he scored that touchdown, he put his hands behind his back like he was getting handcuffed, and then Jalen Waddle came with the key to unlock it. So, yeah, Tyreek Hill.
Yeah. Well, what are you looking for next?
I'm looking forward to the season opener against the Browns this Sunday. I'm super excited. I get to film the games this year, so I'm really hoping it doesn't rain. I'm hoping it's not hot.
Yeah, that's, I guess, the best you can hope for.
Yeah, I know.
This season. All right. Alessandra, thanks so much for being here. We always appreciate it.
Of course. Thank you, guys. Have a great day.
You too. And that's our program. We encourage your feedback and suggestions. You can send either to First Coast Connect at WJCT.org. If you missed anything, catch our rebroadcast when the program airs tonight at 8. Or you can find our entire archive at WJCT.org or your favorite podcast platform. Join us tomorrow for our monthly Ask the Mayor segment with Jacksonville Mayor Donna Deegan. I'm Ann Schindler. You've been listening to First Coast Connect on WJCT News 89.9.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided in part by Baptist Health.
Wayne Hogan of the Terrell Hogan Personal Injury and Wrongful Death Law Firm. When people are hurt through no fault of their own, answering who, what, when, where, why, and how is critical to proving the truth. More at terrellhogan.com.
Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjacks.com.
Liberty Life, the pro-military paper and audio articles from Kings Bay to Camp Blanding. Serves Army, Navy, Air Force, Coast Guard, and Marines. Liberty Life is available wherever the military, veterans, and their families gather. Online at libertylifemedia.com.